Good morning. Two topics this morning. One later on should be a bright political one with Chuckles Cook, Gordon Gibson and the NDP from North Van Burnaby. Forget the polls. Let's look at the issues if there are any to be found lying around. But first this morning, we've been looking at the abortion situation in Washington State and British Columbia. And it's become perfectly clear. Matter of fact, I remember when women had to fly to Japan, fly now and abort later in Japan, to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy, and then to England. And then our criminal code was somewhat delicately amended, putting the responsibility on hospital committees, those hospital boards which wanted to do abortions. And there has been screams and clamours that some of our bigger hotels have become abortion mills. Pro-life, of course, have become much stronger. Doctors, it would seem, have become more delicate on the topic of abortions. So this morning we're going to look at abortions two ways. We're going to give you a rundown on the system in British Columbia, what's happening to it, and then we're going to go across the border for an abortion for cash. And Brian Coxford is the reporter after this break.
Jack, in Canada, abortion is covered under the criminal code. The criminal code says a hospital can determine if it wants to have an abortion committee. They also have to determine the definition of health. A patient can have an abortion if the health is concerned. So it's open to wide interpretation. Hospital boards are elected. They dictate policy. They tell the abortion committee whether or not an abortion can be performed. It's a difficult situation.
In BC, hospital board meetings like this one last June in Surrey have been attracting large crowds, and the reason is abortion. Surrey Hospital has two pro-lifers, people who oppose abortion, on the 5-member board. But despite their influence, 622 abortions were performed at the hospital last year. At Vancouver General Hospital, there are no pro-lifers on the hospital board. Statistics from 1978 indicate 3,928 abortions were performed here. The policy, if you're under 19 years, you need the consent of a doctor and a parent or a second doctor. At Royal Columbian Hospital last year, 667 abortions were undertaken. If you're under 19 at this hospital, the policy is similar to VGH. A doctor and parent signature must be obtained. At Lionsgate Hospital in North Vancouver, pro-lifers recently won 5 of 18 board positions. The hospital performed 652 operations last year. The policy is again similar to the other hospitals if you're under 19 years of age. But hospital policies are subject to change at any time, according to the wishes of the various hospital boards. And at St. Paul's Hospital, one of the largest in the province, the policy is probably clearer than anywhere else. No abortions performed at all. And it's board decisions like this that upset doctors, because the law isn't clear.
British Columbia and Canada, is it a pretty vague situation in terms of a woman's right to an abortion?
Oh, it's very clouded. I don't think you could say that she has a right to an abortion.
How do you interpret the criminal code? Like, what does the criminal code say in the eyes of a doctor? What's the doctor have to do?
If a woman wishes to have an abortion, she goes to her doctor, and he, either himself or through a specialist, must apply to the hospital, to the abortion committee of the hospital, who decide whether or not the pregnancy is detrimental to the health of the woman.
The definition is health.
The definition is health. If they decide that it is detrimental to the health, then, and 2 doctors agree on that and are willing to sign for it, then the woman may have her abortion. But if the hospital does not feel, or if the abortion committee does not feel it is detrimental to her health, then that hospital will not allow her to have an abortion.
And the word health is open to interpretation.
The word health is open to very broad interpretation.
And I think it goes one step further, and it says, according to the criminal code, that a hospital may or may not set up an abortion committee.
And certainly that's the prerogative of the hospital. If they decide, if their hospital staff decides that they wish to have a committee and perform that service, then they will set one up. If they don't wish to do that, they don't have one, and therefore abortions, by and large, may not be done in that hospital.
Your opinion, what do you think of abortion boards?
My opinion is not, I was going to say printable, I suppose we should say talkable on television. I think it's a dreadful system. totally inappropriate. It puts the procedure in the category of a criminal act, which I don't believe it is. It puts the onus on 3 members of the medical profession to judge whether or not this is a worthy case. I don't think they should be asked to do that. I don't think that it's the sort of issue that people should make judgments on. I think it's a very personal issue. I think it's a dreadful system.
Placed it wrongly, squarely in the laps of the doctors?
Yes. I'm a very strong believer in personal responsibility, and I believe that the responsibility for such a procedure should be taken by the person who wishes the procedure.
The politicians have, I suppose, nicely skirted the issue.
Skirted, I don't think they've even come close to it. They've just gone around the outside of it. It's a very, very touchy issue. Of course it is.
Personally speaking, Doctor, what do you think should be done?
Personally speaking, I don't think that this is a matter that should be dealt with in the criminal code. I think it should be dealt with as any other medical procedure is. In the criminal code, insofar as one may not practice medicine without a license, of course, and may not perform a surgical assault on anyone without their permission, but not taken out of the context of the whole general health care of the woman. My personal opinion is that this is a matter to be decided on by the woman and her partner and her doctor.
So you're saying, 1, take the abortion out of the criminal code, and 2, put the final onus on the woman?
In the final analysis, the woman.
Should it be taken out of the context of the hospital altogether?
You mean have clinics where this service is performed? I think that would be a very good pattern if the clinics were well set up and well maintained, because by and large she is not sick, but she certainly needs services available for any emergency procedures that need to be done if such a thing arises. That is, they need good anesthetic care, facilities for blood and other replacement therapy, facilities to take care of her in an emergency. But she does not need to take up a bed in an acute care hospital.
With that in mind, abortion committees, get rid of them?
Get rid of the...
Abortion committees.
Get rid of the abortion committees? Oh, certainly get rid of the abortion committees. That would be the first step out.
That's one professional medical view from Dr. Hunter in West Vancouver, family practice doctor. That makes it clear. In British Columbia, forget whether you're for or against abortion, whether you're a pro-lifer or not. We're talking about a therapeutic procedure. In British Columbia, if you're lucky to have a doctor who practices in a hospital which has a fairly generous committee which interprets the laws generously, physical or mental health, the woman can have the abortion, no problem. Is that right?
Right, which is the case at most hospitals.
But there are places in British Columbia where you couldn't get one, you'd have to fly down to Vancouver or elsewhere, Victoria, and attempt to get through the abortion committee.
If that hospital board chooses not to have abortions performed at their hospital.
What's next, Brian?
Next we talk about clinics. Dr. Hunter referred to perhaps taking it out of the hospital, putting it in clinics. We went down to Seattle, where abortion is legal on demand.
From a doctor?
From a doctor.
For how much?
$140.
Next, Brian and the Seattle Clinic, abortion on demand. Walk in, walk out, 2 hours, pay cash. After the break.
If a woman finds a need to head to Washington State to obtain an abortion, she might find herself in the clinic run by this man, Dr. Merton Proctor of Bellevue. His clinic employs 12 people. They perform up to 75 operations a week.
The pre-AB instructions? Okay, do you have a pencil and paper? All right. First of all, have nothing to eat or drink for
The abortions
3
in
hours
Washington
before
State
your
are largely
time.
performed in clinics like Dr. Proctor's, not in hospitals as in BC. It's a surgical procedure that takes about 5 minutes, a simple operation, during which every effort is made to make the woman comfortable under less traumatic conditions.
That's true, yes. It's very safe and, in fact, safer, about 12 times safer than a normal delivery. And some people have mentioned that it's about 475 times safer than riding in an automobile. Probably the biggest factor is the problem of the emotional aspect, and terminating a pregnancy early is much easier for a woman to do than if she has to wait till she goes through labor like a miscarriage or something like this. And in my mind, guilt is probably the most serious complication of abortion, and I really believe, and we do a lot to deal with these feelings, and as much as possible have people leaving the clinic not feeling guilty about having an abortion. In general, not any hassles, as long as she is able to connect with the people that are informed and available to provide abortion services. Planned Parenthood and a lot of doctors are very open and free to refer. And there are clinics around Seattle area, at least, where women can have abortions very safely and quite easily, and with a very short waiting period from the standpoint of making appointments. There's no requirements in the state of Washington or in the United States, for that matter, as far as getting permission from hospital boards or having medical indications or any of that sort of thing. Abortions are available to anyone who is pregnant and doesn't want to be pregnant. So that it's primarily a matter of making the diagnosis and then making an appointment with someone who does abortions.
So the board idea is a reverse of what we face in British Columbia.
That's correct. There's no requirement there. No, they have no need to have any special interviews or any special evaluation as to whether they're in need of an abortion. The need is decided by the patient and the physician.
Patient need any consent?
Only her own. No consent from the standpoint of parents if she's a minor or husband if she's married. This was changed approximately, the minor consent was changed in 1973, and in 1975 the Supreme Court ruled that there was no need to have husband's consent.
So the theory is then if you're old enough to become pregnant, you're old enough to get an abortion.
That's correct. Yeah. And it's essentially abortion on demand for those that want an abortion. And I feel very strongly that that's the way it's best handled, because only the individual knows or can make the decision as to whether she wants to be pregnant or not.
Yeah. You see the hospital board method as being, quite traumatic in some cases and quite complicated?
It's very complicated and traumatic, and it's also unfair because of the opinions and beliefs that the members of the board may have and may force upon a person, whether the person is agreeable or in that particular frame of mind at all. And I think it's a total waste of time and money and an infringement upon people's rights.
This clinic that you run here, you deal solely in abortions.
That's correct.
How many would you do roughly in a week?
Probably 60 to 75.
Yeah, you deal with Canadians at all?
Yes, a few.
And what numbers?
Oh, I would estimate somewhere around 10 or 12 a week.
10 or 12 a week, so we're looking in excess of 10% anyway.
Somewhere around 10%, yeah.
Could you tell us where these, say, 10 or 12 a week that come in here from Canada are coming from?
Biggest percentage are coming from the Edmonton area, Calgary, and up in that northern part of Saskatchewan.
So the ones that, say, come from Edmonton or, say, in parts of Saskatchewan, they'd fly in. Would it be a one-day procedure for them?
If they can make pretty good connections. They frequently have to fly in the night before, then stay overnight, have the procedure done the following day, and then catch the plane back that same day.
And they're only here, what, a couple hours?
About 2 hours.
The method that you use here, a fairly simple procedure?
The actual suction procedure is a very short, simple procedure. It only requires about 5 or 6 minutes to do the procedure itself. And the suction procedure, if they're further along, it sometimes takes a little longer, but most patients are in and out very quickly.
And the cost?
The Seattle area is charging, the range is around $140, $140 to $175 for the whole procedure. And this includes counseling, and it includes all of the medication. We give medication prior to the procedure to help them relax. Then we also test their blood for anemia, and if they need iron, we give iron. We test their blood for the RH factor, whether they're RH positive or RH negative. And if they're RH negative, a medication called microgam is given to prevent future problems with future pregnancies as far as RH incompatibilities are concerned. We also give them antibiotics to take home with them after the procedure. And the antibiotics are given primarily as a protective dose of medication for gonorrhea. We culture everybody for gonorrhea, and but we also give this medications because of the fact that we sometimes only see the patients once, and if we should get a positive report back, at least we know they've had the medication, and probably will have no problems with that. Then we also provide a 2-week exam to make sure that everything's back to normal, and birth control advice, and we frequently give them, if they're going to be on birth control pills, we'll give them a sample of birth control pills to get started.
To patients that come, say, from Canada, Edmonton or parts of Saskatchewan, where they're just that far out of reach where they can't come back for another visit, what do you recommend? That they see their own physician? Or?
We recommend they see a physician of their own there, or there are some Planned Parenthood agencies in those areas too that will frequently do the 2-week checks.
Let's compare the cost here, the $140 in your clinic, with, say, the possible costs of a woman having to stay in a hospital all night.
Well, if a patient has to go into the hospital for an abortion and spend the night, the cost is apt to be as much as $400 or $500. And so that's significantly more than what we're charging. And in my mind, it's totally unnecessary. And I really believe that there's evidence to show that it's probably safer to be done in the office at much less expense anyway. The only statistical information we keep is for the state vital statistics, which is merely a gathering of data as to the number of abortions and where they're located and complications that may occur during the procedure, and whether they're married, and age, and whether it's medically indicated or whether it's voluntary. Those are the primary things that we keep track of as far as the state of Washington is concerned. No names, no other involvement is necessary.
Your patients tend to be younger or of average age? Or?
Well, the average age range, the highest age range is between the ages of 16 and 25. But there are people all the way from age 10 to 47 or 48 that I've dealt with. And about a third are married.
Sure. That's the man in Seattle. Next, we're going to have an interview with Dr. Norman Rigby, Executive Director of the BC Medical Association. Sharp, succinct. Coxford, Webster. You're not a doctor, are you?
Not this week.
Neither am I. Dr. Rigby, after the break. Rafe Mayer, the Minister of Health in British Columbia, will be on this program on February the 11th. And on that occasion, we'll go into the whole range of abortion and give pro-lifers and the others a chance to get involved in their particular philosophical issues. Not dealing with the pro-life question this morning, dealing with the practical aspects of abortion as she is delivered in Washington State and in British Columbia. Dr. Rigby, as you know, is the Executive Director of the BC Medical Association. Straightforward question. Do you think your colleagues welcome this now freely available and comparatively cheaply priced system of going down to Washington for abortions, no committees, no fuss, no muss, no age limits? You pay your money and you get what is quite obviously competent clinical medical service.
I'm sure that is so, Jack. I have some concerns about that because a woman who's going to have an abortion, if she needs her doctor or gynecologist at that time of her life, she really needs him then, because it's a devastating physical and mental ordeal for her to go through. And it's not just a question of having an abortion, Jack. It's the counseling that leads up to the abortion. It's the advice, support, and help after the abortion, and the birth control advice, which is so important. So it concerns me to think that women from British Columbia are going down to the United States to get abortions, because abortion is only just part of the problem.
You're not questioning the standard or the efficaciousness of the treatment in Seattle?
No.
All things being equal?
All things being equal, I'm not questioning that at all. What concerns me is that woman.
What you're saying, therefore, is that that woman should be dealt with by her own doctor in her own
community.
Area, in her own community.
Yes, I'm saying that.
But if you are a family with an abortion which is causing great social and mental health concern, would you want to go through the caper of a committee which was a foot-dragging committee on a board which perhaps doesn't want to do abortions? Even Mayer has said, he's backtracked a little bit since, that BC is doing too many abortions and that they must be clamped down on.
I don't know whether that is true or not, Jack. The position that we take is that it's a matter between her, the patient and her doctor. And then on advice, if she decides to have an abortion, that abortion should be done with safety and with compassion.
Subject to getting through the committee.
Yes, that's the way it is now. We would like to take that all out of committees in hospitals and have it a matter just between that patient and her doctor.
In other words, you would like the Seattle system,
Yes,
but you want the Seattle system done in British Columbia.
we want to take it out of the criminal code, Jack, and make it like any other medical or surgical procedure, a matter of between the patient and the doctor's duty is to give that woman advice, bearing in mind all the circumstances surrounding the case, whether it's an abortion or not, and then give her good advice, and then do the abortion if necessary, as I say, with safety and with compassion.
Now, when you were talking to Dr. Proctor in Seattle, Brian, did he tell you, I forget, at what stage the Washington state medical people got total freedom to do abortions, even down to the level of 10-year-olds?
It's been without the consent procedure since 1973, and they wiped out the system where husbands had to give consent in 1977.
What did he say about permission for minors?
If you're old enough to get pregnant, you're old enough to consent to your own abortion.
And he mentioned the name of the age of 10, did he not?
Yes.
And how many such clinics are there in the Seattle, Bellingham area?
There's close to half a dozen, and I might add that in Washington State, the figure about 27,000 abortions per year comes up. 2,000 of those are out-of-state abortions.
Dr. Proctor didn't raise the question of the spectre at all that worries me, apparently, of abortion, this simplified suction procedure being used as simple birth control, did he?
No, in fairness to him, we should point out that when you go in that clinic, he counsels you on birth control. He wants you to have a certificate of pregnancy from your own doctor before he'll do anything. If that isn't the case, he'll check you out first, then tell you to go away and think about it and come back another day.
Yeah, well, they seem to be handling it quite reasonably. But you, Dr. Rigby, in the medical profession, our criminal code, too, was loosened slightly. When? Early 70s?
Early 70s, I think, Jack, something like that. The point I'd like to make that I'm not questioning the efficiency or the safety of abortions done in Washington, Seattle. What I'm saying is that that is not really good enough. You must follow these people after abortion. Make sure they get over the trauma, both mental and physical. Make sure that they get proper birth control advice, because abortion is surely a very poor way to practice birth control.
Everybody's agreed on that. But when our criminal code was changed, is it not a fact that it still left abortion as itself a criminal offense, subject to certain exemptions?
That is correct.
And you're not happy with these exemptions? You don't think
I'd like to take it right out of the criminal code.
Do you represent a majority of the BC Medical Association?
I am representing the policy of the Canadian Medical Association and the British Columbia Medical Association.
There are some groups of doctors, I think they call themselves doctors for...
Pro-life doctors?
Pro-life doctors, or doctors for life or something.
Yes.
They do not represent a large segment of your organized
I think you
policy.
have to respect the philosophical point of view, morals, ethics, and religious persuasions of physicians like any other group in society. And it is the position of the Canadian Medical Association that if you're a doctor who, for various religious, moral, or ethical reasons, feels he cannot do abortions, that's fair enough. But he should make available to his patient the resources of other doctors who may or may not do abortions.
Quite bluntly, if you go to a doctor who doesn't want to do an abortion, it's his moral duty to refer you to one who would guide you in the right direction for an abortion.
That could be. I don't think I, as a physician, Jack, am either a judge or a priest, and I mustn't project my own personal feelings about abortion or anything else on my patients.
Do you regard it as a danger? I remember McClellan moved in and virtually seized the General Hospital Administration at one time because of the pro-life threat, did he not?
Yes, well, this has presented some problems, as you're aware, on hospital boards, where it's become a political and social issue of people trying to get majorities on hospital boards either to go ahead with abortions or to try and stop them. And I think that's inappropriate, Jack, very inappropriate. Again, I come back to the theme, it's a matter between a patient and her doctor.
All right, what steps? In fact, I don't think you've taken any steps to lobby for a wide-open change of the criminal code in recent years.
Over the last few years, Jack, at every annual meeting of the Canadian Medical Association, this policy has been brought forward. Last year, or the year before, I'm not quite sure, was the question of where a physician, an ethical physician, feeling he couldn't do abortions, he was urged that he should refer that patient to somebody who may or may not do them. I'm not saying he's referring to a physician who's going to do it, but a physician who hasn't quite got that
But therefore,
rigidity.
basically, the position of the Canadian Medical Association is a woman, subject to good medical advice and counsel, is entitled to do with her body in relation to pregnancy at certain stages as she wishes.
I think that's a good summary.
Well, I don't know. The Seattle business somehow or other upsets me a little. Did it upset you when you were down there at all?
Not really, no.
No, really.
It upsets me, Jack, because it means to me that, as he said on the program, 10% of his patients were Canadians coming from this province. That means that those girls are not getting advice, or they can't get abortions, or they're not getting the necessary support and help, and they have to go down to the United States. There's something wrong when that is happening.
It means it's a kind of failure of our medical system when we can't cope with, under our own laws, if we can restrict this without making everybody mad, we can't do the necessary therapeutic abortions without frightening some people into running out the country.
Yes, I don't want you to get the impression, Jack, that I'm either pro-life or pro-abortion. I don't take any view that way. I come back and say that's a matter between a patient and her physician.
But your CMA says we are for the woman's right, subject to medical counsel, to have a pregnancy terminated at certain stages when she wishes, without the interference of hospital boards.
Or politicians.
Well, that's what I should say, or politicians.
Would you like it out of the hospital setting?
Well,
Apply the Seattle situation here with your own doctor following you through.
what I'd like to see here is that if we set up facilities in conjunction with a hospital that were safe, efficient, and perhaps we could save some money. But the thing that I want to emphasize is that I want that lady to be looked after by her own doctor for the reasons that I've mentioned. I don't like the idea of a woman having, or a young girl having to go to an abortion mill or clinic and be pushed through a sausage machine without the support and help of her physician. That really turns me off.
It is a failure of the Canadian system to a point, regardless of how you slice it. I mean, if women leave here to cross the border to pay cash for abortions, well done, I'm quite sure.
Sure.
Something wrong with our system.
Well, I think so. And just think about that poor girl who has to go down there. She has the abortion. She comes back. There's nobody with her, perhaps a friend or a family member. What's the doctor doing for her?
Listen, it's better than sweating through a 5-week wait for an abortion committee to give you an approval while the fetus grows.
Well, Jack, I would hope that that doesn't happen very often, but it can
It can happen, and it used to happen. My thanks to Dr. Norman Rigby, BC Medical Association. My thanks to reporter Brian Coxford. Next, brace yourself. Do continue to watch. There are issues in this election, and we've got three, I guarantee you, three bright candidates this morning. Chuckles Cook, Gordon Gibson, and Jack Woodward. After the break. Interviewed a Liberal called Don Johnston yesterday from faraway places somewhere in Quebec. Interviewed Joe Clark the day before. Fotheringham thought it was a disaster. Jeffrey Stevens from the Globe and Mail thought it was a first-class interview, and so did I. Back of my hand to the little man in the Gucci cowboy boots. That's Fotheringham, in case you didn't know. Imagine wearing Gucci cowboy boots. He's a caricature of himself. He's beginning to look like Dick Beddoes. Now, I have here three deadly serious candidates engaged in a deadly serious fight. And apparently it's one of the places where the polls show that the Tories are still reasonably popular. The incumbent is Chuck Cook. The challenger is Gordon Gibson. Don't have to interview either of these two gentlemen, but I will. Chuck was an open liner, lawyer, broadcaster, successful candidate. Gordon Gibson was on Trudeau's personal staff, highly educated, up to here with education. Not that that always helps. Leader of the Liberal Party, broke his heart the first time round, thinks he's going to float in this time on the coattails of the silent man. Here we have Jack Woodward, who's 28 years of age, is a practicing lawyer in British Columbia, was executive aide to Ian Waddell, the NDP Member of Parliament for Vancouver Kingsway, has been around a little bit, and UBC graduate. I'm going to give each candidate, I'm going to try not to be too snide this morning, but I'm going to give each candidate a chance to tell me what the issues are in this election. And I'm going to give Chuck Cook the first bash at camera number 2.
In terms of the issues in this election, Jack, a number of things occur to me when we want to talk about issues, and that is the fact that for the first time, you've had an honest government. For the first time, you've had an honest government that actually told the Canadian people the truth and what they needed to be told. Just taking a look at Parliament for a second. We've been accused of having 6 months and having done nothing. We've done a great deal. But I would also point out that only 16 of 47 days that Parliament sat were days on which the government could put in its own program and get started with it. There were a lot of holdovers, a lot of estimates, a lot of things, a lot of housekeeping that had to be done prior to beginning our program. Now, we said we would, in the election campaign, that we'd take the tough decisions to get the country moving, and that we've done. We said we'd manage the finances of this country and that we would begin to live within our means. The last Liberal year meant a deficit of another $10 billion. Now, I think anybody operating their own budget knows if you keep spending more money than you've got, sooner or later you're bankrupt. Sooner or later you've got to make some very difficult decisions. We talked about energy self-sufficiency by 1990, and that is perhaps one of the key issues in this whole election, the believability of the statements by the various parties. We talked about tax relief for mortgage interest and property taxes, and that we were doing. We said we would make the government more open and accountable, and that we've done as well, and are working towards it. We said we'd move away from confrontation with the provinces, and Clark has certainly done that. The issue of national unity hasn't even been mentioned in this election, and last May this was a big issue. In other words, what the Conservative Party has done, and what Joe Clark has done, is set up a framework for the future where this country can move ahead. Really, those are the issues, Jack.
Gordon Gibson.
Well, to start off, I'm very glad that Chuck mentioned government credibility and Tory promises, because I have some of the Conservative campaign literature here from the last election that talks about cutting income taxes by $2 billion when, of course, taxes were raised by $3 billion. That talks about special tax credits for investment in small business, many, many things which just didn't happen, and there's not even time to go through them in this statement, Jack. If you want to talk about a government having a fair time to govern, Mrs. Thatcher was elected Prime Minister of Britain only 1 month before Mr. Clark was elected Prime Minister of Canada. She gave us the Rhodesia settlement. Mr. Clark gave us the Jerusalem embassy. Mrs. Thatcher called Parliament in under 1 month. Mr. Clark waited 5 months, the longest time in Canadian history. She's been a strong Prime Minister. He's been a weak Prime Minister, elected about the same time. The issues in this election, the biggest single election in North Van Burnaby, in my belief, and it has to be riding by riding this time because people are looking at the candidates this time, is whether or not we are going to have some strong Western voices in Ottawa over the next few years when our Confederation is being renegotiated, whether it's going to be renegotiated on Mr. Ryan's ideas or Mr. Bennett's ideas or Mr. Trudeau's. We have got to have strong British Columbians at the bargaining table, and that has been my study, my particular study for the last 2 or 3 years, and I feel very strongly about wanting a chance to get down there and serve British Columbia in that regard. Of course, there's lots of other issues, and I don't know how much time you want to give me. There's the leftover things from the last campaign that are still Liberal policy. Employee stock ownership plan, pension questions, the whole Confederation question. Then there's the question of energy this time around. There's the question of the budget. There's the question of oil tanker traffic off our British Columbia coast that Mr. Clark agreed to. Various Western issues, the Trident, the Tory action on the Trident, when a Liberal government would keep that aircraft flying, the question of reforestation, which has become a national question now, the question of Canadian ownership and tax incentives and so on. I'd be delighted to talk about any of those.
What was the spread between you two last time, please?
About 2,200.
He was 2,200 up on you?
Yes.
And how much was the NDP behind?
2,000 more.
Who was the NDP?
Mr. Hicks, Russell Hicks.
Your name is?
Jack Woodward.
Jack, give me your best shot for 2 minutes.
Okay. The credibility of the Conservatives with respect to energy self-sufficiency is completely shot. Look at this natural gas export, Jack. The 3.75 trillion cubic feet, that's enough to heat 1 million Canadian homes for 25 years. And the Conservative government agreed to sell that natural gas to the United States when we could build a petrochemical industry with that natural gas. We could reduce the deficit, the balance of payments deficit that is so big. There's $1.5 billion in petrochemical deficit each year. Okay, that's credibility of the Tories on self-sufficiency. Now, you talk about oil tanker traffic, Mr. Gibson. The first politicians to raise that issue in the House of Commons were the New Democratic members. The New Democratic members have been the real opposition in this last House of Commons. I was there, I watched. I was in Ottawa this last 8 months working for a member of Parliament, and it really was the New Democratic Party that was the real opposition. So if you talk about sending some strong Western voices to Ottawa, the voices should be NDP members, because they're the people that can keep whatever our next Prime Minister is, assuming it's not Broadbent, although there's still a possibility of that keep the next Prime Minister in check.
You've seen the candidates. You've had them speak uninterruptedly. Now the shafts with Cook, Gibson and Woodward after the break. Terribly difficult, even for an old pro like myself, not to become partisan in these things. But I manage quite well. You think that, I don't, but you think that the export of many trillion feet of national gas is an important election issue?
No, I don't think it's an important issue, but I think really the people should know the facts rather than listening to some of the gobbledygook that's been going on about it. There are 7,000 gas wells that are capped right now because the gas hasn't been sold. The National Energy Board took a good look at the gas situation. They only considered the gas in southern Canada. Now, we have a secure 25-year supply and more, and they've taken in all possibilities of gas being shipped east to Ontario and Quebec as well. And they came to the conclusion that we had far more gas than we needed. Now then, as a result of that, they didn't consider any Arctic gas whatsoever, any Baffin Island gas, any of the new discoveries at all. Just that, and decided that we had enough gas that we could export half of the surplus. Now, by exporting half of that surplus, it means $13 billion over the next 8 years in the balance of payments problem. That's part of it. There are also something like 600 small Canadian gas companies that if they can't export some of their gas, they're going to be bought up by the multinationals. It's an encouragement to Canadian industry. It's an encouragement to those companies to go out and find more gas. It's estimated that exploration for gas will rise by something like $400 million as a result of the sale. It's going to amount to 46,000 jobs in this country, that export of gas. Half of those jobs, approximately half of them, will not be in the producing provinces. Now, that's the reason for that sale of gas. It does not interfere with our security of gas supplies whatsoever, but it sure helps us out.
You next, Gordon. Can you argue with these figures? I don't think so.
No, the export of natural gas is something that the country can afford at this time, and it's something that is an important negotiating tool and being used by the National Energy Board as a negotiating tool.
You approve?
For the early completion of the Alaska gas
in
pipeline.
motion by the Liberals anyway.
But the reason it's an important issue in this election is because it is another example of Mr. Broadbent's miseducation of the public to serve his own ends. And I suppose one shouldn't be puzzled by that, but we are getting into a society where government is getting further and further into the economy. And to the extent that politicians choose to miseducate the public on economic questions, governments are going to be motivated in a miseducated way and make bad economic decisions, and I think that's a disservice to this country.
The natural gas export is undefensible, and Gordon, you know, your party has no credibility either. They set up a system that sold twice as much natural gas as the Conservative sellout this last fall. That's true, twice as much.
We have sold a lot of coal, you know, and a lot of oil.
How can you
and
say?
a lot of gas.
But the natural gas
and
doesn't
a lot of
rot.
oil.
Jack, how many?
It's good, you know.
How many?
You talk about those capped wells. That's still good gas.
Jack,
It's
how many
still-
trillion
Not if
cubic
it
feet of
means-
natural gas do we have in Canada proven at the moment, you know? Any idea?
I don't have
Roughly.
the figures. I don't have the
Within
figures. Do you have the
10 trillion
figures?
cubic
Do you
feet.
have the
Yes, I
figures?
do. I'm just asking if
ahead,
you know,
tell me.
since you're such an expert on it.
I don't have the exact figures. I'm not going to
Are you
speculate
any
on
close?
something like that.
Are you there within 10 trillion cubic feet?
I'm not going to speculate on something like that.
Well, why are you speculating on matters of great energy policy?
Because, Gordon, the fact is that this natural gas should have been kept in Canada to develop a Canadian petrochemical industry.
You don't even know how much there is. We are
Jack, are
developing
you
a Canadian
moderating this
petrochemical
program?
industry.
Are you going to continue to let Gordon bully him? Because that's what he's doing. He's just bullying him.
No, Chuck, I'm suggesting that politicians, before they make statements, should get themselves the background facts.
Question, how many trillion feet of proven natural gas reserves do we have?
About 65.
65 trillion feet.
That's in southern Canada without
Southern
taking into account
Canada,
the northern reserves,
without
which
the
are harder
afternoons.
to
Next
delineate.
question. Next question. I put it to your august leader that if he's going to get beaten this time, it's his image that's going to do it. It is a shame, isn't it?
The
His
shame,
image is so
first
bad.
of all, we're not sure he's going to get beaten yet, because it's the only party that's come out with an honest program. He's the only leader who is saying things that make sense. We have one leader who's saying nothing, and then we have Mr. Broadbent. At least you know where Clark stands. You know what the policies of the Conservatives are. And we're not talking about twinning the CN line all the way west. I mean, the ridiculousness of the Liberal campaign to date, I think it's an offense to the Canadian public. I think it's an insult. I think it's total arrogance on behalf of Mr. Trudeau.
Chuck, you say we know what the policies of the Conservatives are. Now, I thought I knew what the policies of the Conservatives were in the last election, and I've got them written out here. For example, as I say, cut personal income taxes in Canada by at least $2 billion. Now,
Can I answer that
you'll agree the
specific
budget
one?
raised
Okay,
taxes by
stop that.
$3 billion. No,
Cut
but
by
there's a
$2
lot more
billion.
here.
Okay, the reason that we couldn't do that is it would have been totally irresponsible with the condition of the country is in. When we took power and had a look at the national accounts of this country, we found out we'd been lied to.
The national accounts are
If
published
Mr.
every month, as you
No,
know.
just a moment, gentlemen.
That's not true.
Quiet, please, quiet, please, quiet, please, quiet, please,
That.
quiet, please. One of the great scandals of this current election, and I say scandal advisedly, as related to me by Mr. Maxwell Henderson, is that the Auditor General's report for March the 31st, 1979 is secret still. And because there is no House of Commons, cannot be presented to us for discussion in this election campaign. The last year of the Liberal administration. We're not blaming you, but one of your leaders should have got all of the leaders together and got agreement. Trudeau wouldn't agree, of course.
Certainly
to
not.
release
I suspect he would have
McDonnell's
agreed.
report for March 31st, 1970.
I suspect he would have agreed, and I suggest
Did
Mr.
you
Clark, I suggest Mr. Clark should propose that tomorrow.
Do you realize that? Did you know that before I told you this now?
Yes.
You did.
But that's up to the government of the day. It's their
Why
responsibility
don't you
to table that
suggest right
report.
now that, but he can only table it in the House.
But it was up to the government of the day to table it in the House.
But
and
the
they
House
didn't.
had gone by then, according to what Maxwell Henderson
Oh,
told
they
me.
had it before that.
Can I give you the chronology on the thing? I serve on the Public Accounts Committee. A good deal to do with the Auditor General. His report was ready. The House fell on Thursday night. The following Wednesday, 5 days later, was when we were due to get his report. Because the House wasn't sitting, he couldn't release the report. That's it in a nutshell. In other words, just before it was released, the government was brought down.
Now, that damned report should be released now.
I agree.
Will Mr. Clark make that proposal? I think it would be a good proposal.
I think he would
Will you
make that
phone him and ask
proposal.
him?
I will do that today.
Good idea.
And I'll give you odds that Mr. Trudeau will not agree. That is,
Because
if we can find him.
You would need informal approval between all party leaders because it's actually a breach of the statute not to table it in the House.
Well, it might be simply impossible as a matter of law.
Already we're withdrawing, are we, Gordon?
No,
That's
No, no.
You're the lawyer, Chuck, not me.
Time for a break? I feel it is. Time for a break. I want Jack Woodward, who, by the way, I must put this in, I must give you a plug. Your great-uncle John Oliver was the Premier of British Columbia. Eh?
That's true. He was a premier. He was a Liberal, mind you. He wasn't an NDPer.
Great premier.
He was a great man. Fine man. I want you to be quiet, Chuck, and you too, Jack Woodward. Please tell me, if you can without bursting into tears or laughter, how they managed to take a man whom we both know quite well, you much better than me, tough, erudite, intellectual, arrogant, at times brilliant man like Trudeau, who had decided as a failure to walk away. How do you manage to put him in a net, tie his hands behind his back, put Band-Aid across his mouth, and lead him around the country like a poodle? Would you? And I ask that with horror in my voice. I mean, if he came in tomorrow, I'd be terrified of the guy, and I'd have to go at him hard, hard, hard. But how have you been able to do this? Is Keith Davey, of all people, that shambling hulk of a man, is he the real potential Prime Minister of this country?
You won't be surprised if I disagree with the premises of your question.
You agree with my assessment of Trudeau?
That he's an outstanding,
Brilliant.
Brilliant politician.
Arrogant.
I agree with that.
Tough.
Now, I would say from my own personal observation that Mr. Trudeau has mellowed quite a bit in those months in opposition, and he had reached the point where he was stepping down. He asked the party to call a leadership convention. That turned out not to be possible when the House of Commons, in a collective opposition fit of indignation, I might say, rejected the Conservative budget. Mr. Trudeau agreed to stay on for this last election. He is deliberately trying to play up the idea of other spokesmen for the party, of a continuing team that will be in place there, and he is attempting to get across, day by day, some of the issues in this campaign rather than just the personalities, which last time around the media simply declined to talk about. Let me give you an example. One of the most important announcements of the last election that affects every one of us one day is the question of pensions, particularly the private pension sector. Mr. Trudeau made an announcement in the last election that was
specious on a perfectly simple question. I must further question you on. Are you telling me that Mr. Trudeau has taken the position whereby he is a pro tem caretaker trying to rebuild a new team, having lost MacDonald, Turner, Andrus, Mackesy, Martian, Campagnola, on and on and on? Is that what you're telling me?
Not
He's
a pro tem
caretaker looking for a successor.
Not in any sense a pro tem caretaker, but a leader till the next one's chosen.
When is that?
Secondly,
the day after the election?
No, of course not. It'll be a couple of years at least. Secondly,
So
now,
he's not going to be Prime Minister for the length of Parliament?
he has said very clearly this is his last election, without question. I'll give you the quote here if you want.
He
Now-
rented his house
now-
for 3 years, didn't
Would
he?
you be
in
quiet,
Montreal?
please? Would
That's
you be
right.
quiet, please?
That's right. Now, you talk about the loss of some of those old former Liberals. Yesterday, you interviewed on this program Don Johnson from Montreal, one of the outstanding young people in Canadian politics in this country, and I think you'd agree with that after talking to him.
Right, fellow.
The other night in Vancouver Quadra was nominated as a Liberal candidate Dr. Peter Pearce, one of the outstanding resource economists in this country. And that is the kind of a new Liberal team we're coming along, that the departure of the former people leaves room for on the front benches.
Another one.
And I say that's an improvement.
Because they know what's his name? Trudeau is going, these new people are coming in.
No, these new people are coming in because they're Liberals and have... Peter Pearce, for goodness sake, was a provincial Liberal candidate. That's how long he's been a Liberal.
I just want one last little nag at you. Can you look me straight in the eye, Gordon Gibson, and tell me that Trudeau is proud in his present part in the campaign, in your view?
Yes.
Proud of his part in the campaign?
Yes, because I have never known...
No debate?
Yes, because the debate was going to be a televised press conference. The television networks wanted to make stars out of their fellas. What we wanted was a head-to-head debate by the leaders.
I'd have done it without
just as they do, of course, in Parliament every day of the year. There's nothing new about this, you know, a television
Well, as you
debate.
know, I'm not exactly a Liberal lover, nor a Tory lover, nor an NDP lover. But I must admit, I'm very disappointed in Trudeau's apparent succumbing to the man with the butterfly net and leading him round.
Well, Jack, I think you know Mr. Trudeau well enough to know he doesn't succumb to anyone.
That's why I don't understand that.
He accepts advice if he thinks it's good. And I think you'll find
Make
out
up
that's
your
what he
own
thinks.
mind about Mr. Trudeau. I think it's time for a break, and then we'll must go to telephone calls. We can't hog the whole program. My guests are Mr. Cook, Tory, Mr. Gibson, Liberal, and Mr. Woodward, NDP, North Vancouver, Burnaby. They're all terribly nice fellows. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack and gentlemen. Jack, I got two quick things I'd like, one for Mr. Gibson and one for Mr. Woodward. To Mr. Gibson, in regards to energy prices, Mr. agreed, so did the whole Liberal Party, that oil price definitely has to go up. Now, in his last statement as of yesterday, he said that he would not tell anybody how much the Liberal Party would increase the oil. Now, how does anybody expect to vote for any kind of a party that agrees that oil and gas has to go up, but they won't tell us what or how much until they're in? Secondly, again for you, Mr. Gibson, in regards to the statement that Mr. Trudeau made, double railing from Winnipeg to Vancouver. Now, in the last election, it was a fact that the biggest problem was that we did not have enough rail cars to handle the grain to bring it out here. Now, why would anybody turn around and put a second track up if we don't even have the rail cars right now that we can run it on one track? And not only that,
Okay, that's two good questions.
It would cost $750 million.
Okay, good questions.
100 miles.
Gordon Gibson, briefly.
Well, first of all, on the double tracking, I have an article here from the Globe and Mail that the CNR was working even before. It says plans to double track much of Line and West included in CNR projections. This has been a CNR plan for some time.
In other words, it's not a political promise at all. It's just picking up on some current plans in the long haul.
That would be my assessment.
How much did you put up the price of gas as against the 18-cent Tory price hike in the budget?
Okay, that's the
simple answer.
The caller's question was specific. Why no specific price?
Right.
Why did
not?
Mr. Trudeau say yesterday no specific price after he said before there was? The answer to that is quite simple, because we want to continue to have good relationships with the various provinces, and it was decided that one of the ways not to do that was to make a unilateral announcement during the campaign. But I can tell you how it will be calculated. It will be a made-in-Canada price. It will be a blended price of that 1/6 of the world's oil which is imported, of that roughly a similar amount which is produced by synthetic oil.
18 cents a gallon, and bid here.
If you just hold on a minute, because it's going to change every year, and it has to change every year, because the other component is the declining reserves of Canada's low-cost conventional oil, and that blended price will move year by year. I would guess that blended price now would be something a little bit around $19, something like just a very rough estimate, and I would say that we would have to move to that over 3 or 4 years.
Which I understood you. Let's ignore the answer. You don't want to answer it. You know where you stand. Go ahead, please.
I'd like to talk to all three candidates. Okay?
Yes, carry on.
The armed forces of Canada are practically non-existent. I'd like to ask the NDP and the Liberals especially, do they intend to support the United States with military forces and also gas and oil? All parties are avoiding the issue, and it's the one big issue in front of the public, and a great many of us are going to vote for whoever backs the United States militarily.
Fair question. Afghanistan crisis, anything can happen. Carter's asking for support on the Olympics. Trudeau won't give it. Clark would. The armed forces, it's agreed, are in a shambles. Are we agreed, gentlemen? Moved, seconded, and carried. The Canadian armed forces are in a shambles.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I'm not an expert on it, Jack.
Don't you know?
No, I don't.
Don't you know that during the October Revolution we had 34,000 ground troops? And that now we haven't got enough to fill half of Empire Stadium? And we have 127 generals and 17,000 men and 7 ships at Esquimalt and only 3 sailable?
There's some things I know quite a lot about, and that does not include the Defense Department. But
it's a shambles.
But in answering the caller's question, because I think we can be very specific on that, Canada has military alliances with the United States, which we should always honor and value, because the United States is our best friend. And I understand it's the NDP platform in this election to withdraw from NORAD and NATO. At least that's what
What
Ron
is the
Johnson
NDP
said.
platform on NORAD and NATO?
I'll give you the complete answer on that question. It's
No,
an
give me a
important
short
issue.
answer.
Our official party policy several years ago, at a time, by the way, when Mr. Trudeau's policy was to withdraw from NATO, was also to withdraw from NATO.
We cut back, it was never to withdraw.
Let me finish. I had lunch with Mr. Broadbent yesterday. We discussed this very issue.
Good.
We are reconsidering our policy on withdrawal from NATO because of the fact that we're in an international crisis and we have absolutely no intention, none whatsoever, of abandoning our commitments to our allies, and we're sticking with that. And we are committed to the defense of the free world.
Chuck?
Well, very simple. 10 years of neglect of the military forces of this country. The Honorable McKinnon is changing that, our Minister of National Defense. We are beginning the re-equipment of the Canadian forces. We will live up to any commitments, and we certainly will support the United States, and I can't say it's any more straightforward than that.
You know, it seems crazy to buy these old-fashioned planes at fancy prices.
Mr. Clark's assessment of the importance of that portfolio was he didn't put Mr. McKinnon in the inner cabinet even.
Go ahead, please.
Somehow the Japanese have decreased their oil importation and increased their productivity. What do the individual parties intend to do to increase our productivity, efficiency, and lessen our inflation?
That's really too broad a question. It is. How can you answer that question in less than 20 minutes?
Want us to try?
No, I don't want you to try. Don't see any sense of it. Depends on your budgetary policies, your social policies, and it goes through the total platform.
I'll say one thing about inflation, though. One thing about inflation is that if you increase the cost of fuel, of petroleum, of gasoline, that's a cornerstone of the economy, and that has ripples throughout the whole economy, and that will increase inflation.
One of the answers is Petrocan, to his question, I would say.
Part of the answer is Petrocan. Only part of the answer is Petrocan.
Go ahead, please. White Horse. Go ahead from White Horse. Good morning, White Horse.
Hello.
Hello. If you're from White Horse, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
I'm from White Horse. Jack and I'm gonna congratulate you the first for the non-smoking or the cutting cigarette.
Thank you very much. I'm doing my very best. I don't want to die yet.
Secondly, you remind me of somebody, one was a great leader. And thirdly, I want to ask you a more personal question, though. Why did the government, present government, and who was after the Mr. Clark, or our Prime Minister, he called the people of Canada, the voters, they're stupid.
Who was that?
Program before yesterday.
Who was that?
But who was after Mr. Clark before yesterday? He called the people of Canada, the voters, he called them a stupid.
Just hold on a second. What were we saying, Suzanne?
Or something.
No. I can't follow your call. Thanks for the good wishes. Get it a little clearer the next time and keep watching the White Horse. Sometimes you just can't win a call. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chuck Cook, how many times have you spoken out for North Burnaby in the Parliament in the last 7 months?
Probably about well over 100 times.
Zero enhancer.
Zero enhancer.
Not once.
You can't say that, Chuck. You can't say that. You didn't open your mouth in the House of Commons, and that's what the question was. You didn't say a word.
Correct. Now, just a minute now. Can I answer that? I don't need to speak in the House of Commons to work for my riding. We've been quite effective in caucus. But when I've got a question or I want something done for my riding, I go and talk to the minister, and I get my answers, and I get things done. And that's what we've been doing. Speaking in the House of Commons isn't the whole issue, as you both well know. The issue is, how effective have you been on behalf of your riding? Well, I've been very effective and will stand on the record. Quite frankly, we've done a lot for our riding, and we'll continue to do so.
I'm not trying to harry you on this.
Sure.
You have not once got up and made a maiden speech in the House.
That's right.
Well, you might have said, hello, boys, here I am.
To what purpose, Jack? Do you want me to work for the riding, or do you want me to be a professional politician and be speaking in the House all of the time to no effect?
Well,
I want to get the job done that is a job for an MP to do.
So your position, Chuck, is that you're talking a lot in caucus, but that's secret.
That's right. And oh, wait a minute. Take a look at the committee reports of public accounts. Take a look at those committee reports, and you'll find I'm there very prominently working to save this country money and to attack the bureaucrats in terms of spending. There's a lot of stuff in the Public Accounts Committee we've done. That's published. There are other areas as well.
On the first degree, you don't have to be a Sven Robinson up and down like a jack-in-the-box on every possible occasion. But if you get elected, do me a favor, make a maiden speech.
We would have 3 days after the House fell, as a matter of fact.
You didn't call Parliament for 5 months?
Next question. That was a good question, that. Although, go ahead, please.
Question for Mr. Gordon Gibson on a current topic. Mr. Trudeau has gone on record in the past as desiring and wanting to encourage closer ties with the Soviet Union, and because of our dependence upon the United States Americans. In light of the recent events with the ousting of Soviet attachés, Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, is this still liberal policy?
First of all, Liberal policy has always been that our first and greatest friend in this world, and I think most Canadians agree with this, is the United States of America. Insofar as the ousting of Soviet officials, functionaries, attachés, and so on, that was done several times during the period of Mr. Trudeau's government. The expulsion by the current government is just the latest in a series.
In other words, you're telling me that despite Mr. Trudeau's occasional gaffes in the past in Cuba and whatnot, and he's really a strong supporter of the Western Allies.
There's absolutely no question of that whatsoever.
Thank you. Your name is?
Gordon Gibson.
You're running where?
North Vancouver, Burnaby.
Your name is?
Jack Woodward, and I'm running North Vancouver, Burnaby.
Your name is?
I'm Chuck Cook, and I hope you'll vote for me.
You're the incumbent. I'm Jack Webster. I'll be back after the break. Many of you will remember with fondness, reverence, and affection the following column heading in the Vancouver Sun. Mr. Scott died yesterday.
Tomorrow we have with us Dr. David Bates, who is the chairman of the Royal Commission on Uranium Mining. Brian has a story on child abuse, and also a very special hello this morning to Hazelton, BC, who are joining us on the network for the first time.
And thank you very much. And a very special condolences to the Scott family. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.